May 13th. Wow, okay. Where do I begin, huh? Right, the beginning. Or at least a few hours after my last post. At around 4:45 p.m. yesterday, I made my way over to the compendium to have some dinner with Maury and spend some time with him. And of course, just ask what in the world that spherical puzzle was all about, with its flower and overpowering dozing effect that sent me into what first was a drug trip of a dream into something that felt like a warning. I thought about the words over and over. You have no idea what nightmare you've just stepped into. The words still turned as I approached the door. The sign flipped to closed. I let myself in. Maury, it's Anthony, I yelled for him. Ah, Anthony, do come in here. Let me lead you to my quarters, he said giddily. I kind of chuckled to myself. Haven't heard anyone refer to their room as quarters unless it was in some old medieval movie or something. We reached his, what I can only describe as apartment. Didn't look too shabby, though. Neat and tidy, and surprisingly spacious enough to fit Maury himself. Immediately upon walking in was the dining room, the living room to the right, and a kitchen to the left. Honestly, it just makes me further believe that him and this place aren't all that bad. Weird trinket that said I stepped into a nightmare. It had to be a complete fluke, a wild card. I'm sure he wouldn't have given it to me if he had known the entire inner workings of that thing, right? No time for that. He pulled out a chair for me at the dining table. Please sit, he said. I sat down and looked around, taking in his little abode somewhere as I heard him begin shuffling around in his kitchen, starting dinner. Oh, what's on the menu tonight, Moore? I asked, genuinely pretty hungry by this point. It was about dinner time after all. Oh, nothing too special, just some bacon, eggs, and hash browns. Breakfast for dinner has always been a favorite of mine, he said as he pulled out a package of bacon and a carton of eggs from his fridge and set them at the counter, starting to grab pans and utensils. Doesn't sound bad, not bad at all, I said, giving a small smile. I decided to not beat around the bush. So, about the freebie you gave me, I piped up. Maury looked over his shoulder briefly. Yes? Well, I ended up solving the puzzle, but what was inside of it did something, I continued, watching Maury for any sort of reaction. Nothing so far. Well, what was inside of it? He asked. It was this purple flower, I started. Maury froze before slowly turning to me. A glowing one? He asked, his voice slightly shaky. I nodded. With that, he raced to the other seat at the table, where I had put the puzzle ball in the center. He grabbed the ball, almost sitting before glancing at me. What did it do? He asked urgently. So he really doesn't know, I thought. I then recounted to him what had happened the day before. The smell, the knockout effect, that I had a dream. After I finished, he sat back, tears in his jet black eyes. Oh, no, what have I done? Maury hollered in distress. What? What is it? I asked. If I'd known that thing held this If I'd known that thing held the purple flower within it, I'd never have given it to you. There's a very good reason they only tend to be on my suit, he said sternly, pointing to his usual suit in the far corner of the living room, hanging on a hook. You see, Anthony, that flower was as much lavender as it was a rose. It isn't. You perceived it as such because it's the closest thing your brain could equate the smell to. What about the dream? He asked. I could feel the fear, the worry oozing off of Maury like mud. It made me even more fearful than I already was. I explained it, the colors, then the lack thereof, and then the mouth that had spoken a vague threat to me before laughing. You've no idea the nightmare you've just stepped into. I recounted quietly. Maury only sat, head in his hands. Abamon, he said, almost silently. Huh? I asked. Abamon was the one who spoke to you. There's so much to explain, so much you wouldn't believe. Maury hesitated. Try me more, I said, looking deep into his eyes, as uncomfortable as that made me. He stared back at me a moment before shaking his head and sighing. Oh, all right. But don't say that I didn't warn you that I'd sound crazy, he said sternly. I simply nodded, and with that, he sat back, took a deep breath, and began. The only proper way to explain Abamon is to explain me first. I saw the way you looked at me when you first saw me yesterday, and you are completely justified in having such a reaction. But all the same, I am human just like anyone else. Just not entirely. My name was Billy Bronson. I was a soldier in the Great War, what you all know as World War I. With the Yanks, of course, and in my group, there was one man, sick in the head. The man was definitely just there for the slaughter and nothing more. An absolute madman. Jackson Fitch. And during one battle, we both got hit. The exact same time. Fell in tandem and everything. In our dying moments, he reached out a brotherly hand. But I rejected it. And I told him what I really thought of him. That I hated him. Thought he was a monster. That's funny, he had responded in his raspy, quieting voice. Because He died then. But I knew what he was going to say. He hated me too. Because I was the only one to ever challenge him on his absolutely psychotic behavior. He hated being challenged. And while I never knew where he went after he slipped off this mortal coil, I sure remember where I went. Certainly not heaven, hell, or purgatory. It was the void. And from that void, a voice told me that I had another job now. To guard, maintain, and share wonderfully strange and weird trinkets in a place called the Compendium. Another in a long line of shopkeepers, a very important duty. Objects that held magic powers, some good, some bad, and only I would know. So for decades, me and this old place have traveled to towns big and small where I've given the appropriate objects to the appropriate people. So when I say some good, some bad, most of the objects in this place are bad, because there's just so much ugliness in this world. But those trinkets ultimately changed those people for the better, made them see the full scope of their actions. I knew I was doing a good service. And then, a good 20 years ago, I hop around every 3 or so. Keep things interesting, anyhow. 20 years ago, 2004, the Compendium sat near a small Manhattan neighborhood in New York. Many people, sad, hurt, broken people, came in those days. It was 3 years after the attacks. They scared me far more than I thought they would. I was in the Great War, and there was World War II for Pete's sake. Could it get any worse? But then I thought, they came to us and attacked us. They had that power, and it terrified me. So I understand why even 3 years ago people were still affected. I sure was. But on one particular day, someone came in, silent as a house mouse, and left a note. I was in back at the time, and they were so quiet, I hadn't even noticed until I got out to the counter. I looked around. No one in sight. So I picked up the letter. It wasn't even in an envelope, just tri-folded with a black wax seal. No symbol in the seal, just a black circle, like the black spot of death. I opened it, and it read, "Skull and crossbones, barley and booze. Which of these relics shall I choose?" And below that were obviously signed the initials JF. Firth, I'd growled to myself, Part of me just knew that it was him, and he clearly had been spared a well-deserved fate by the afterlife. Or at least I thought at the time. That same night, as I sat with a nice plate of steak and eggs with a side of toast, from behind me in my own living room, I heard him. "Well, well, well, if it isn't Billy Bronson," he piped up cheerfully. "How'd you get in here, Firth?" He chuckled and sat forward, clasping his hands in his lap. "Oh, I've got my ways. Anywho, just wanted to drop in and say hello." It took everything in me not to lunge at him right then and there. We'd both died once. It'd be no use. "You said hello with your little note earlier today. I don't know what you've become, but I know that I need to keep you away from those trinkets," I yelled angrily. "Oh, and I'll stay away, for now. But once I'm ready, I'm ready. And there will be no stopping me. How about I rub a little salt in that wound of unwavering hate of yours? You see, I was in that void too," he said, a twisted grin forming on his face, as if his face were made of clay. What? I couldn't believe it. There was no way. "The void gave you another life too?" "Yes, indeed. But I've got a different purpose. Other things to worry about for the next couple of decades. So it's why I say you're safe for now," he said, that stupid grin still on his face. There was nothing I could do or say. The void gave him a purpose, and I couldn't change that. But I wasn't about to let him get a hold of a trinket, physically, at least. I hadn't even thought of the other implications of his newfound power. "If I could kill you myself," I muttered, infuriated. Firth just laughed again. "Well, I'd best be off. So much to do. So much time. Bye for now, Bronson." "You can call me Moriarty," I snapped at him. You too? Well then, Moriarty, you may call me Abaman." And he turned and left. And that was the last I'd seen of him, let alone heard of him, until now. Maury finally finished. I sat, processing, trying to make sense of and believe this absolutely wild story. But after what I'd seen up to this point, the trinkets, the ball and its strange effect, and now that dream was this man's arch nemesis of sorts. We both sat in silence before Maury tried to further clarify things. "You see, that trinket was honestly meant to do something good for you. I can tell you're a good person, so the fact that it knocked you out and gave you that nightmare. Abaman must have finally picked his relic. And without my knowing," he said, shaking quite a bit now. "Well, what do we do?" I asked almost frantically. "That's just it, Anthony. I don't know. At this point, we'll just have to see what happens from here. I promise you I will find some way to fix all of this. I'm so sorry," he said, breaking into an anguished sob. Hey, Maury, relax. This is not your fault. From what you've told me, Abaman just found a loophole you didn't even know about. We will figure this out. Believe me, this crap is absolutely Fruit Loops to me, but after these past couple days, months even, I think I can let myself start believing that things are about to get stranger," I said, looking him dead in the eyes. "Thank you, Anthony, for being so understanding. It sounds like a drug trip in and of itself, and part of me wishes it all wasn't real either," he answered, looking off into space for a moment. "But enough of that. The longer we sit, the longer he has to push whatever plan he has going," Maury said, suddenly standing. "Are we still having dinner?" I asked, my hunger suddenly returning to my mind. "Oh, right. Plan and cook. Good thinking," Maury responded. For the next half hour or so, as Moriarty cooked the bacon, eggs, and hash browns, we discussed possible plans. Well, mainly possible objects that could help with this whole thing. By the time we finished up with everything, it was about 8 p.m. "Well, Maury, I gotta get home and get some sleep. I'll stop by tomorrow and see if you found anything," I said. "Excellent. I could use the rest myself after all of that," he chuckled. "All right. Good night, Moore," I said, making my way out. "Good night," he called after me. I quietly shut the door and headed back down and out. And here we are now. I can't believe it either. Like something out of a horror novel or something. As always, I'll keep you all updated. Anthony out. Thanks so much for listening, guys. A quick shout out to my patrons. Kevin Kess, Sabiel Eclipse, 055555, Cormac Wells, Amara, Matthew Steiner, Cupcake Hips, Alonzo, Mr. Sankofa, Michael Milburn, Kozak, Icy Narrates, Jesse Hartley, Eric Cifuentes, Andreas Anderson London, Lawrence Wallen, Geek Sanctuary, Melissa Perez, and this guy. That is someone's actual username. I love that. Thanks again so much for watching, guys. If there's anything you would like me to pray for, I would love to know how I can be praying for you. I hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next video.